I'd like to tell you about something that happened to me a year or so ago, before bookshelves became an extension of ourselves. But it is about books. I'd found a new bookshop. Never seen it before in town, hidden down an alleyway, an old rope walk. And if you know Bridport, you'll know its rope walks and how a place talks, its history embedded into its layout, its stories told in its streets. And Bridports are neat, long pathways for spinning yarns, and nothing much has changed. Well, on this particular day, I took the nook between two other bookshops and then up some stairs outside. But once inside, you have to go downstairs again. A rickety old staircase too. Wend and whine, groan and moan, squeak and squeal, bleat and creak. But once in there, thousands of books. Books on philanthropy and philately, philandering and flattery. Bibles boasting unheard gospels, special editions with special additions, codexes of complex equations, abridged miniatures shrunken a bit like raisins, tiny and tight but still sweet and light, full of their original interest and flavour. Titanic atlases, themselves the size of small countries, all of them stacked floor to ceiling, ceiling to floor, in every crevice and in some places more. But it was the basement that beckoned me, so I crept to the crypt downstairs and creepy, where even the light itself seemed slower, picked out by brick, wood and paper dust swirling. A small brass sign, etched and once filled but now faded, above the doorway said, "Biography." Oh, what a joy to me to learn the foibles and flaws of the great and the good, trying to understand the misunderstood. Is there anything better at making us feel better? All the classics were there and more. Mandela and Malala, Gandhi and Goebbels, Warhol and Herzog, Basquiat and Betjeman, Anne of Cleves, Gentleman Jim Reeves, Clint Eastwood, Vivienne Westwood, Robert Stevenson, Elton John, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, all the rocket men. There is a grid-like town guide to the mind of Spear, a knotty work examining Peer Point the hangman, a generally quite realistic look at the life of Einstein, a titty-tail tale of the Prince Consort and what he got up to, an absurd little book all about Camus. So that's just the Alberts. Then I moved on and along and up and down until I came to a name that made me frown. An old mayor of my hometown, Jocelyn Frampton Brown. Not a name you forget once you see it written down. And then more names of people I recognised. More than that, names of people I knew. Several, more than a few. I stopped for a moment, momentarily muddled by the momentous momentum of this, what this moment might mean, a mystery. I looked back. Maybe I was wrong, but there on the shelf, no doubt in it, people I had grown up with. Robert Clark, Heather Clough, Graham Dunn, Claire Dunn. I was nearly done, I could tell you there and then, but I had to look. Emma Robinson, James Robinson, Justin Rose, Victoria Rose, Dylan Ross. My heart skipped a beat and I stuttered and stumbled. I couldn't believe it. Could I believe that? And curiosity, and although I'm not a cat, still. I pulled out the book with my name on it and let it fall open. And the page it fell open on was dated a week before my birthday. Freaky. A description of muffled noises, dark hues and reds and blues, a thumpity thump thump of two hearts beating in unison. Page 2. The day I was born, all in the third person, a description of my birth, stuff that I would never know and details even my parents have forgotten or never knew, squeamish as my dad is and busy as my mother was. Those first few pages, description was intense, wild, insane, but hardly specific. I certainly couldn't say if it was correct. So I skipped a few chapters forward. First birthday, second, third, all still out of touch of my own recollection. But then a description of something I sort of remember. And then my fifth birthday. And the book described in detail exactly what happened, but more than that. explained how I felt, something I'd never told anyone. I closed the book slowly. The book was well made, a pigskin, leather bound, not heavy but thick enough. I looked for an author's name, but there was none, only mine, on the spine, and on the inside pages that of my parents. A small prologue about them. Second generation immigrant, lapsed Jewish heritage, working class, blah-de-blah, middle class, aspirations, wanting better for their son. So I read on. Primary, 11 plus, grammar school, comp, fast track to journalism, slide into IT, meeting Sarah, my Sarah. The way my heart skipped when I saw her. All the facts, but such description too, the detail, the dialogue, so honest and real, and things were described not as I remembered them, but as they truly were. Adulthood? Well, sort of. The band I was in, and when I read the details of what I was thinking, well, what was I thinking? Drink and drugs and rock and roll and work and love and fun and luck, and it struck me then as I read how lucky I've been. This was no morality tale, although sometimes I skated on ice that was too thin or sailed too close to the wind. And then I reached the part where I moved here to Bridport. A surprise party turned into a wedding. Cocktails, monkey tails, rope makers, woodsmen, river walks and seaside strolls. Going into town for poetry gigs, interesting beers with even more interesting people. Market days and delving into bookshops. The page I was on began describing South Street and the hidden alleyway between two bookshops, and if you know Bridport, you'll know it's rope walks. Long pathways for spinning yarns. Nothing much has changed. And on this particular day, wend and whine, groan and moan, squeak and squeal, bleat and creak. And in such fine detail it described me, not only what I was wearing, but the spooky fear and fascination I was feeling. How the hair stood up on the back of my neck as I stood there in the half-light reading. I read the words. A chill went up Dylan's spine, and he spun round, and a chill went up my spine, and I span round. I snapped the book shut. I wasn't sure what I read. Was it real? Was it true? Was I cursed? Was I blessed? The book seemed to be about halfway through, which is good, I guess. But I held it shut, and I held it tight, and wondered and shook and wondered. Just a book? Now I ask you, what would you do if you found such a book with your name on it? Would you turn to the next page or slam it shut with rage, or would you return it to the shelf and run away? Would you skip to the end to see what it might say? Well, what did I do? I did open it again, just very briefly, very carefully, and I flicked a few pages forward, and to be honest, I didn't believe what I read. Even though those words have stuck in my head, and I've kept them secret till now, because it seemed so unreal, impossible somehow. At the time it reassured me, because it possibly couldn't be true, but now we know what we know. And it just goes to show you never can tell what the next chapter will bring. Dystopian sci-fi, far-fetched fantasy. Not quite lifelike, but of course. And these were the words. In my mind they've been burnt. All the bookshops were shut. And the libraries too, and cafes, and the pubs, and universities, and schools. But stories. Stories are wily, stories adapt, stories aren't governed by guidelines or rules. Stories aren't only found in books, they are found in the crevices and found in the nooks. They grow where people can't go. Stories are alive, we feel them inside, and we live out the stories of our lives. And so the stories find their way online, told in videos, sometimes in rhyme. And we share our stories, we share our lives, and that way we are never alone. And the very last line? Dylan smiled and sighed at the camera built into his phone.